listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. This podcast is all about expanding the conversation around infidelity. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are dealing with infidelity make decisions about how to move forward that are truly right for them. On this show, we feature tools and guidance from my coaching practice and advice from other professionals whose work pertains to the sometimes complicated business of human romantic relationships. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Barry McCarthy, diplomat in clinical psychology and sex therapy. Barry is Professor Emeritus of Psychology at American University and the author of 22 books, the latest being Contemporary Male Sexuality and Rekindling Desire, now in its third edition. He is a recipient of the Masters and Johnson Award for lifetime contributions to the sex therapy field. You can reach Barry via email, and we'll have his email address in the show notes. Before we start talking about Barry's concept of good enough sex and what it means for our relationships, this episode is brought to you by me, Marie Murphy, PhD. I provide shame-free, blame-free, non-judgmental relationship coaching. To learn more about my coaching practice or to schedule an introductory coaching session, go to mariemurphyphd.com. All right, Barry, it's great to talk with you today.
I'm really glad to be here. I enjoy talking about sexuality and how complex and how important it is.
Great.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, let's get right into your concept of good enough sex. Tell us what this means.
Okay, it's a concept that was developed by my colleague who's now deceased, Mike Metz. And what we tried to do is to confront the old image that sex was an individual pass-fail test. It either was perfect or it was not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we're saying is that, in fact, sex is a couple concept, not an individual concept.
Yeah.
And as a couple, the question is how you integrate three very different things: intimacy, pleasuring, and eroticism. They're all important and they're hard to integrate. And the usual split is women value intimacy, men value eroticism. They get into this power struggle of intercourse or nothing.
Yeah.
When it's intercourse or nothing eventually wins. Good enough sex is a couple concept, and the essence is that it's sharing pleasure. And that sexuality is very complex. It has a number of roles, meanings, and outcomes. And that most of the time, sexuality will flow to intercourse, which is a wonderful thing. But that intercourse is not a pass-fail measure of sex. That one of the most important concepts is to understand that sexuality includes sensual scenarios, playful scenarios, erotic non-intercourse scenarios, as well as intercourse. So the notion of good enough sex is that it's realistic, it's positive, and it really applies to real life couples, not either the romantic love, passionate sex, idealization, perfectionism approach on one extreme, or the porn approach on the other extreme. Both of those extremes cause people to feel they're not good enough sexually.
Tell us a little bit about what you mean by the porn approach on the other extreme.
In the porn approach, the message is very clear, and that is sex is about the man's fantasy, the man being in control. The man always has a perfect erection. He always orgasms, and usually you see him ejaculating on a woman's body, especially her face. And that the message about women is the crazier the woman, the more erotic she is, and the crazier the scenario, the more erotic it is. That it takes eroticism, which is integral to healthy sexuality, and puts it on a pedestal. And it says the other thing about porn is it really intimidates men.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they're aware that it's a fantasy image, there's nothing wrong with porn. But when you combine high degrees of secrecy, high degrees of eroticism, high degrees of shame, it's like taking a sexual poison pill. It really is destructive to you. The truth is, nobody has erections like they have in porn. It's a fantasy dimension. So one of the things you want to do is you want to talk to real men and real women about real couple sexuality. And when it comes to adults in an ongoing relationship, there are many more similarities between men and women than differences, no matter what you read in pop psychology.
Yes, thank you for that. You know what? I'm embarrassed. I think I've forgotten one of the three things. We're talking about eroticism, Intimacy.
Okay, so we're talking about, and it doesn't have to be in this order either, but intimacy allows you to feel close, warm, connected, and safe.
Eroticism.
Pleasuring is all about giving and receiving pleasure-oriented touching. It can involve sensual, affectionate, playful touching. And the third is eroticism, and that involves high degrees of sensations and feelings. And if you think about sex being on a 10-point scale, where 0 is neutral and 10 is orgasm, that the way to think about intimacy is it's not sexual, but it anchors you at one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The way to think about pleasuring is its subjective arousal between 1 and 5, and eroticism is subjective arousal between 6 and 10.
Oh, interesting. That's a great distinction.
Now, let me also make a point, and again, if I'm speaking too fast or stop, but that is that the major reason that men fail at Viagra is a good drug, although Cialis is probably a better drug for most couples.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that they fail is as soon as the man gets an erection, his subjective arousal being 4 or 5, he rushes to intercourse because he's afraid he's going to lose his erection.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And that one of the most valuable concepts is that you don't transition to intercourse until subjective arousal is at least a 7 and ideally an 8. That is so helpful to both men and women in terms of understanding the role and meaning of intercourse as a couple process, not a pass-fail individual.
Yeah, I love that. What's the pharmacological differences between Viagra and Cialis?
Very, very little.
Okay.
Very little. The big difference is, does it fit into your couple style? So, for example, men who are procrastinators or who like structure often do better with Viagra because that you have a 1 hour to 4 hour window of opportunity to be sexual. The reason that Cialis works for many couples is you want to integrate it into your couple sexual style. So you've got a 30-minute to 30-hour window of opportunity.
Oh, interesting.
It's easier.
Big difference.
But the big thing that I always say to people, because again, I'm a psychologist as well as a sex therapist, is that in understanding sexuality, you've got to look at biomedical factors, psychological factors, relational factors, especially psychosexual skills.
Sure. Yeah.
And you can't ask a medication to do it all, whether it's a male or a female medication.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
The drug companies lie to you. They say,
sure.
I'll get you erections like you had back in your 20s. That isn't true. Or they'll say to women, you'll be so aroused if you take this injection or this medication that you'll be like the woman in the porn videos. It's not true. It's a lie. It's setting you up to fail.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the book, The Little Blue Pill by Mika Lowe?
A little bit. I've glanced at it. I haven't read it totally.
It's getting older and older by the minute, but it's a good one. She's a sociologist. And I used to teach her work to undergraduates when I taught sexuality classes. And we talked about Viagra and what does sex mean and what role does an erection play in sex and sexuality?
Well, again, I'm always pro-arousal, pro-erection, and pro-intercourse.
Mm-hmm.
But when it becomes a pass-fail test,
right?
The biggest thing that turns women off is after a sexual experience, the first thing the man says to her is, "Did you come?"
Mm-hmm.
It sets female orgasm as a performance goal,
sure,
rather than as a natural continuation of the pleasuring eroticism process.
Right. Let's talk about performance goals and how we tend to confuse performance goals with good sex.
So when I think about the essence of sex, it is sharing intimacy, pleasuring, and eroticism. And all three of them are different, but they're very, very important.
Yeah.
So, but what you want to do when you think about sexual function, I don't like the word performance. It's too much of that pass-fail test stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about sexual function, the ideal scenario, I want to be really clear about that, is mutual and synchronous. And that is, both people feel desire, both people feel pleasure, both people feel erotically charged, and both people feel satisfied. And satisfaction includes orgasm, but it's much more than orgasm.
Right.
So mutual synchronous sex is the best. But for the majority of couples and the majority of their sexual encounters are positive for both people, but they're asynchronous. What that means, they're better for one partner than the other. Now, traditionally, asynchronous sex has been better for men than for women who are up to age 40. But interestingly, after age 65, asynchronous sex tends to be better for the woman than the man. So you want to, again, emphasize positive, realistic expectations and to really enjoy it. You also talk a lot about the issue about affairs, the value of affairs, and how erotic they can be. Is that
Sure.
true?
Well, I mean, I deal with a lot of topics related to infidelity, but certainly I do see that people find erotic fulfillment in affairs, especially
Absolutely.
when, the sexual activity in their primary relationship has either been completely off the table for quite some time or very close to it.
Okay. So again, one of the things that's important to talk about in terms of good information is that about 1 out of 5 married couples have intercourse sex less than 10 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
1 out of 5. And one of the things that most people don't understand and find shocking, actually, is the most common time that occurs is early in the marriage, the first 2 years of the marriage.
I think a
And
lot
the
of people are going to be
reason,
fascinated to hear that.
well,
Sorry to
here's
interrupt.
what it is. The majority of folks, whether they're married or partnered, whether they're straight or gay, not everybody. One of my favorite lines is that sexually one size never fits all.
No.
It's one of the things that makes sex so interesting is it's so complex.
Yeah.
But for the majority of folks, they learn to be sexual early in the relationship in what is called a limerence phase of a sexual relationship. And limerence means romantic love, passionate sex idealization. I absolutely love the limerence phase. I do. But it's very fragile. It's very time limited, about 6 months to a year. 2 years if you're really super lucky. The challenge after the limerence phase is to find your own couple sexual style that really does work for you, that integrates intimacy, pleasuring, and eroticism. There's not one right way to do it, but you've got to find a way that allows sex and desire, which is the most important thing sexually, much more important than orgasm. Desire is the core issue sexually, where you anticipate being sexual, you feel that you deserve for sex to work in your life.
Say that last part again, just so it's clear. I didn't quite catch some of those
when I
words.
think about desire,
Yeah.
the core of desire is positive anticipation.
Yep.
You look forward to being sexual. You're open to it. You're
Yeah.
willing to engage.
Yep.
The second is you feel that you deserve for sex to work at this time in your life and in this relationship.
I love that. You deserve for sex to work at this time in your life and this time in your relationship.
Right. And even if your kids aren't doing well, even if you just lost your job,
Yep.
even if you're 30 pounds overweight,
Yep.
you still deserve pleasure-oriented.
Boom. That's big.
Right. And I think what happens when couples stop being sexual, or that sex is into a very routine, Saturday night, 3 minutes of foreplay, 3 minutes of intercourse, 1 minute of afterplay, even if the sex is functional in terms of arousal and orgasm, it does not feed desire.
Right.
It's kind of routine and boring.
Right.
That one of the things that feeds desire is the sense of freedom and choice. And one of the things about freedom and choice is you have the right to veto a scenario and technique that you don't like.
Yeah.
And that your partner will honor your veto. The idea you can't say yes to sex unless you have the power to say no to sex. And then you want sex to be unpredictable, a little playful, mixing, sometimes intimate and sometimes very erotic.
Yeah.
That notion of non-routine sex is really helpful to people.
For sure.
Now, here's the deal. When they stop being sexual, they not just stop having intercourse, they usually also stop affectionate, sometimes affectionate, but usually sensual, playful, and erotic touch. When it's intercourse or nothing, it's nothing. So that rather than sex playing that healthy 15 to 20%, let me try to spell that out. What I mean by that is that you feel desire and desirable as a human being, and your bond is energized. Again, whether you're sexual friends, you're in a cohabitating relationship, partnered relationship, or you're a married relationship, you want it to play that 15 to 20%. When sex is avoided or it's conflictual, it plays an enormously powerful negative role.
Yeah.
It really
So wait, let me pause you real quick. Let's just back up. Let's talk about what you mean when you say that sex can play a positive 15 to 20% role in your life and your relationship. Let's just expand that one a little more fully.
Sure.
Yeah.
So sex is not the most important thing in your life or in a relationship. But when you think about a healthy relationship, when I think about a healthy relationship anyway, It's a relationship that's satisfying first. You feel you're a healthier person because you're in that relationship. It's also secure, and secure is much more than stable. Secure means you feel valued as a person, and this relationship has value for you. And then the role of sexuality is that 15 to 20% role that allows you to feel desire, which is the most important thing sexually. I love arousal and orgasm. I want to be clear about that. But desire is the core issue sexually, where you're really open and willing. And you feel that your bond is special, that it's energized. Now, when couples divorce, and this is pretty clear data, the most common time that they divorce is early in a marriage, not late. And the major reason they divorce early in a marriage is sexual. They stop being sexual. They're dealing with infertility or fertility problems, rather. Infertility. Infertility is the worst thing that happens to people sexually. There's something really unfair. You've spent 5-10 years of your life trying not to get pregnant. Now you want to and can't. It's really unfair and terrible.
Yeah.
But that's also the issue of the role of affairs.
Sure.
Again, the most common time for affairs is the first 5 years of the marriage. And for women specifically, it's the first 2 years of it. And it does cause all kinds of conflicts. And they get into a power struggle where they say, we had a monogamy agreement, and the person who had the affair said, no, we didn't have a monogamy agreement. So it's another one of these power struggles.
Sure.
One of the things that I think is interesting is that it happens in most affairs, not all, but most, is that affair sex tends to be much more highly charged and erotic than marital sex does.
Sure.
Because it's the limerence phase multiplied by 3. You've got secrecy, you're breaking boundaries, and you're risk-taking.
Yep.
It really is powerful.
Yeah.
Now, people often, when most couples survive affairs, that's another, married couples, by the way, have the fewest percentage of affairs. Cohabitating couples have the highest percentage of affairs. Dating couples the second. But most couples, especially married couples, survive affairs. But one of the things when I work with those folks is I always say to them, you cannot compare marital sex and affair sex.
Sure.
Affair sex is always more erotically charged.
Sure.
What you can compare is marital sex after the affair and integrating what you learned about yourself and relationship.
Right.
With marital sex before the affair.
Right. Right.
Now, I'm not encouraging people to have affairs, but I am saying that if you stay together, you can integrate what you learned in the affair and apply that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go back to what happened. I took you off on a tangent a moment or two back. We were talking about, when sexuality is positive in the relationship, it can play about a 15 to 20% role in your life and in the relationship. But when the sexuality in a relationship isn't going well, it assumes a disproportionately negative role. Let's go back to that for a moment.
Okay. So what do you want to talk more about the negative role? Yeah.
So what happens then? Things aren't going well. It becomes more significant. And we were chatting earlier about the joke where, if the sex is good in a relationship, it's 1% of the relationship. If the sex is bad in a relationship, it's 99% of the relationship. It's just a old joke in sexual health education from the 90s, but
I would still say it's more important than 1%. I would give it that 15 to 20%.
Yes, I concur, but it's a good joke.
It is a good joke. But let me tell you what happens when couples are stuck sexually.
Yeah.
Remember, again, people feel isolated. They feel that I'm the only one in my community where we're having this problem. One of the things that people don't get scientific, and again, the science of sex isn't less good than the science of marriage or the science of mental health. But there is a science to it. And that is the average couple have intercourse sex between 3 times a month and 12 times a month. And the average couple, about 50% of couples who are married and have been married 2 years or longer, report sexual dissatisfaction or dysfunction. Of folks who are not married but have been together 2 years or longer, 2 out of 3 report sexual dissatisfaction or dysfunction. So the notion is that American couples are not doing so much better than they used to, that there's the old myths about repressive attitudes and bad knowledge, but the new myths are the myth about erotic perfectionism, or that the best way to be sexual, the kinkier you are, the better is your sex.
Yeah.
And you feel stuck between those extremes and say, I'm not having as much sex as my neighbor or my my workmate or whatever.
My imagined friend, the imagined
people
standard.
are having sex now less than they were 10 years ago. And I think the biggest issue is they never made that transition between limerence sex and finding a couple sexual style that worked for them individually and as a couple.
I love that point. Love that. So, just to put it in slightly different terms, you get together and everything's amazing and hot and spontaneous and it feels so good and easy. And it's so easy to drop everything to be sexual together. And all of the other pressures in life don't seem so big and bad. And then once that wears off, you never figure out how to do something different. You never figure out that it's okay to schedule sex. You never figure out that maybe you need to schedule sex and have a no devices rule in order to actually create the possibility for something new to take root.
That most of the time, especially with people who work and have children, their sexual experiences are planned or semi-planned. That's also, again, I love spontaneous sex. But if you're waiting for spontaneous sex, it's like waiting for Godot.
Right.
And then, looking forward to it, we call it, in terms of technical ideas about sex therapy, it's learning to build her bridges to desire, his bridges to desire, and our bridges to desire. Mm-hmm. Different ways of connecting.
Right. Or even if it isn't his and hers, just yours and mine and ours. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So if that's applicable to both lesbian and gay male couples.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if there's one thing that I would have your audience think about, it is that you want to redefine what you mean by sex. So many couples only have two gears. They have affection, they have intercourse. Mm-hmm. So it's intercourse or nothing. I think one of the most valuable insights is to value sensual touch. Sensual means non-genital, warm, cuddly kinds of things, where your subjective arousal is 2 or 3. Playful touch, which mixes genital and non-genital, like dancing in romantic or erotic ways, taking a bath or shower together. And that's 4 or 5 on that arousal scale. And then erotic sex often leads to intercourse, most of the time leads to intercourse, but it has value in and of itself, whether it's manual, oral, rubbing, or stimulation. And that you see intercourse as a natural extension of the pleasuring eroticism process. So you want to think of having at least 3 gears and ideally all 5 gears of touch. And that is sexual. It isn't most men define sex as intercourse. Let me give you another fact that most people don't know. It'll shock. And that is when couples stop being sexual, especially after age 50. And over 90% of the time, it is the man's choice. It isn't a joint decision. It isn't it's the man's choice, even though at 50, 1 out of 3 adult women report low desire and are really disappointed sexually. They don't want to stop being sexual. Mm-hmm. And it isn't that the man wants to stop being sexual, but he defines sex by erection and intercourse. And he says, I don't want to start something I can't finish. Mm-hmm. I try the Viagra. It doesn't work like in the ads. And I give up. What I always say to people is nobody gets the results that you get in the ads.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to turn towards your partner and really enjoy intimacy, pleasuring, and eroticism.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so true no matter what our age is and no matter what body parts we're working with. And I love the question, what is sex? What do we think sex is? And here's another story from 100 years ago. But when I would teach undergraduate sociology students, I would say on the first day of class, you have a homework assignment. They've just met me. They don't know what's going on. They've just gotten their syllabus. Mm-hmm. And I say, your homework assignment is to go home and ask someone what sex is. Maybe it's your roommate. Maybe it's your dog. Maybe it's your dad. Maybe it's your best friend or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they all would, this would be an auditorium full of kids. And what would happen is people would stare and their jaws would kind of drop and then they'd mm-hmm. start to laugh and they'd say, are you serious? And I'd say, I'm completely serious. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, the next class meeting, we'd come back and have show and tell. So what is sex? What does sex mean? And it would open up these amazing discussions. But of course, the whole point is so many people believe that sex is penetration, sex is penile vaginal intercourse. And, in
there's
other contexts,
that is sex, but to make it the only definition of sex is oppressive for men.
Yeah. Sure. It's oppressive for everybody. And I used to work with medical students too. That's a whole nother story. They couldn't even conceptualize what sex might mean if there weren't both penises and vaginas involved. And that's a whole other thing. So save that for another day. But it's expanding our imaginations for our own sakes about what is sexually enjoyable for us is such a gift to ourselves and to our relationships.
I absolutely agree. And I think this notion that says that you want to value intercourse and orgasm. I always value intercourse and orgasm. But I don't want it to be the definition. The definition is it's a couple process of sharing pleasure. It could be sensual pleasure. It could be erotic pleasure. It could be intercourse pleasure. It could be orgasm pleasure. And you want to have positive, realistic expectations. So let me throw in one thing that I always love to throw in. And that is if you look at happy couples, sexually satisfied couples, 5 to 15% of their sexual encounters are dissatisfying or dysfunctional. It's normal to have disappointing or lousy sex.
Good. Yes.
And what you don't want to do is you don't want to panic and apologize. That's very anti-erotic. You want to be able to say to your partner, this isn't going to be an intercourse night, but let's have a sensual date. Let's end it in a good way. Let's have a sensual date, an erotic date. It can be mutual and synchronous, or it can be asynchronous. But let's have a good, and then let's get together in the next couple of days and have a more mutual experience.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think normalizing the fact that sometimes things don't go that well is really important.
Absolutely right.
Now, here's a question that a lot of folks I work with come up against. The sex in their relationship hasn't been good enough by their previous definition for a long time. They've tried things to make things better. Maybe they've seen a sex therapist with their partner. Maybe they've tried talking with their partner. Maybe they've gone to couples counseling, not sex therapy per se, but they're kind of at the end of their rope and they're trying to figure out, quote, what the right thing to do is, or quote, what it's reasonable for them to want in terms of good enough sex. What do you say to these questions?
Well, what I say to them is to give it a 6-month good faith effort, whether you do it on your own or with the guidance of somebody who does couple work. Because when you approach a sexual problem as a couple, the likelihood of change is much greater, but the relapse rates are much lower because you feel accountable to each other. And then what you want to, we wrote a book, the 3rd edition of Rekindling Desire is probably our most famous book. It isn't our best book, but it's most famous book. And that is to look at people who have a non-sexual relationship and say to them, give it a 6-month good faith effort to create a new couple sexual style. One of the things that I say to them is that for most couples, especially couples who've been in marriage therapy, they emphasize communication and security and being best friends. And best friend relational style is the best decision for most couples. But it's a lousy, lousy decision when it comes to sexuality. And the reason for that is there's so much emphasis on communication and intimacy that you wind up de-eroticizing your partner and de-eroticizing the relationship. That the real challenge is to find the right sexual style for you that blends intimacy and eroticism. And that the challenge for the woman is to find her erotic voice. The challenge for the man is to express his value for pleasuring and intimacy. That not all sex is about arousal and orgasm. And it's a really important learning.
Can we apply that to same-sex couples too?
Well, the biggest issue, and you can very much apply it to them, but there are different challenges for gay male couples as opposed to lesbian couples. And that one of the most valuable insights with lesbian couples is to emphasize giving up the best friend sexual style. There's just too much closeness. They don't have enough independence. And with the best friend sexual style, you can't accept asynchronous sex. You've got to be on the same page. The bigger challenge for gay male couples is that traditionally, gay male couples were not supposed to value a relationship. Now, valuing a relationship doesn't mean traditional monogamy, but it means truly valuing your partner and feeling good about being a sexual couple. That's the challenge for gay male couples, is to have a more integrated approach to sexuality generally, especially an integrated approach to eroticism. So you've got to deal with what facilitates your sexuality, but also what are your challenges? What are the things that subvert your sexuality? And I think the thing that becomes really important in terms of, especially, I think the issues are the same for men and women. The challenges are different. The challenges, I think, for men is to accept who you are sexually with your strengths and your vulnerability. One of my favorite one-liners is that 85% of men feel that their penis is smaller than average.
Oh, yeah,
Doesn't
that's
make
such a
any
good,
sense.
yeah, right.
But this idea that you can be loved and cared about with your strengths and vulnerability. And then I think the challenge for the woman is to find her unique sexual voice, especially her erotic voice, and integrate that into couple sexuality. One of the exercises, I am a big believer in psychosexual skill exercise. I probably write about them as much as anybody does in the United States. And my favorite of the psychosexual skill exercises is where you have an exercise where each partner, and this is true of married couples, unmarried couples, straight or gay couples, each partner has the right to initiate their favorite scenario, their preferred scenario, in terms of how they initiate, how they do pleasuring, how they do eroticism, how they do orgasm, how they do afterplay.
Mm-hmm.
And again, by the way, afterplay is the most ignored part of stuff. I've done this with over 1,000 couples.
Yeah.
I've never seen any couple where they each had the same preferred scenario. And I think, again, that's a good value. That you are a unique sexual couple, you need to find your unique voice. But that's why people get very discouraged. It's like losing weight. They get very discouraged because they say, I did all the things I was supposed to do. What I often say to them is, have you done the integration? The most common thing is they try to do either intimacy by itself or doing erotic acting out. They watch porn videos together. They act out fantasies together. There is no science that says that works.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And there is science that says that neither the extreme of intimacy or eroticism, either of those extremes, really work for most couples.
I think that's such a great point. So you're saying that the integration of intimacy, pleasure, and eroticism are the components that have to go together in order for a change to really occur in creating new couple sexual styles.
Right.
Yeah.
And a style that you both own.
Yeah.
And again, the whole idea of asynchronous sex, just to make sure that everybody gets that,
mm-hmm.
is that it is better for one partner than the other. That's the norm. But it's not at the expense of the partner or the expense of the relationship. Let me give you another nitty-gritty that I often share with my audiences.
Yeah, please.
And that is the worst time to talk sex is when you're nude in bed after a negative experience. People say and do things that cause great damage to your partner and to the relationship.
Yeah.
Women say to men because they're hurt, not because they want to hurt him. They're confused and hurt. So if you can't keep it up, why do you bother to stay alive?
Yeah.
That is really destructive.
Yeah.
Or the man says to the woman, I thought you were a new woman. And I now live in North Carolina, so a new North Carolina woman. And he said, if I knew who you really were, I wouldn't have married you. That really hurts.
Yeah.
The best time to talk sex is in a therapist's office where the therapist is skilled and competent listening to sexual stories and being helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Or on your own the day before being sexual, over a walk or a cup of tea or a glass of wine, and saying, next time we're sexual, let's experiment with this. It's not a performance. It's trying things out to see if they fit for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Trying things out to see if they fit for us. Definitely. What do you say to folks who, have a great interest in rekindling the sexual fires in a relationship and their partner doesn't seem interested and has rejected their attempts repeatedly?
Well, what I would say is you've got to stop the power struggle, whether it's the traditional power struggle where it's the man who's pressing sex or it's the woman pressing sex. It's the same dynamic. Power struggles are about who's the bad partner, not about resolving anything. And what I say to them is ultimately, each of you is responsible for your own sexual voice and your own sexual autonomy. But at its core, sex is a team sport. You've got to approach this as a team. And so low desire or inhibited desire is the common enemy. It isn't something wrong with you. Low desire and sexual avoidance is the common enemy. How do we stay on the same team in approaching it? And how do we genuinely give it a good faith effort rather than a once or twice pass fail time? Because that really drains you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think that people, I've done a lot of sex. I've probably seen a little bit over 4,300 couples around sex issues. 85% of people have sensitive secret material their spouse doesn't know. It can be about big things, like sexual trauma histories, like secrets about affairs. It can be about marrying for negative reasons. It can be about a million different things.
Right.
But the secrets often poison the person in their relationship. So I see so many people who have a contingent sexual self-esteem and a contingent sexual relationship. They say, if my partner knew this about me, they wouldn't stay with me, they wouldn't love me, they wouldn't be attracted. And I think that those secrets really poison the relationship. And that's one of the values of therapy, is to process those secrets in a therapeutic way. So it doesn't weigh down your sexual desire.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you got to look at what promotes desire, but also what subverts desire, what poisons desire.
Beyond secrets, how do you help people who just feel totally overwhelmed by the burdens of everyday life and the demands of career and family and so on, and don't have the interest at this moment in their lives to be sexual, even though they understand that maybe to their partner, sex is really important and perhaps the relationship itself is hanging in the balance?
A key concept, this actually was developed for women, but it's very applicable to men, especially over 50, is called responsive sexual desire. You know, when you see portrayals of sex in the media, it's always spontaneous desire. A man has a spontaneous erection. The woman is feeling really loving or really sexually turned on. It's all about spontaneous desire. For people who work, have kids, have stresses, have illnesses, have disabilities, often they begin an encounter at neutral, at zero. As they touch and are touched, as they're aware of their feelings and their partner's feelings, that's when they feel subjective arousal at 2, 3, or 4. And that's when they feel desire. Desire comes from the interaction rather than spontaneously. So what people say is, I'm too tired for sex. But if you allowed yourself to be aware and mindful and allowed yourself to touch and be touched, you might find feeling good feelings that either can be acted out that day or build for in the next 2 days.
Yes. Let's talk about your concept of mindfulness around sex, because it's such an important way to tune into the present moment and rekindle our sexual connection to ourselves and our partner.
Right. So I think the notion about mindfulness, which is a very important concept, that's kind of like the Masters and Johnson sensate focus.
Sensate focus, yes.
Right. And that is, you allow yourself to be present without judgment, where you're mindful and present without judgment. And you're aware of your body and your sensations, and you let it flow. And you feel more connected to yourself, but also often more connected to your partner. So you're more open, and you can be open to a sensual date. You can be open to a playful date, or you can be open to an erotic date, or you can be open to an intercourse date, but open to engaging in pleasure. You know, in terms of women, again, no one size never fits all. It's never this simplistic. Most women do not like traditional foreplay.
What do you consider traditional foreplay?
Where the man is aroused and he tries to arouse her, especially with genital stimulation, until she's ready for intercourse. What works so much better for the majority of couples is giving and receiving pleasure-oriented touching, where she is actively involved. And even if she's only receiving, she is not passive. She is mindful and aware of her feelings and sensations. And the notion is that it isn't he who decides when they're going to transition to erotic stimulation. Either of them can, but they both need to be at least 5 or 6, and ideally more. And ideally, they don't transition to intercourse until their subjective arousal is much higher. So one of the things I always tell couples is that most people, especially women, but men too, enjoy multiple stimulation both before intercourse and during intercourse. So intercourse isn't just thrusting. Intercourse is involving for the man, the woman, and the couple, including using erotic fantasies as a bridge to high arousal and orgasm.
Yeah.
Probably too many concepts too fast.
Let's just wrap up by talking a little bit more about what mindfulness means in the context of a sensual moment. And I can tell you what I think about this.
Sure, I'd love to hear.
You know, so often we are thinking about 8 million different things other than what's going on in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we're kind of quote unquote tired, not to say that we don't actually get tired, but if we think we're tired and our partner tries to touch us, our automatic knee-jerk reaction may be like, not now, it's too late, I'm too tired, blah, 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 blah. But instead of that, being open to inquiring as to like, what am I really feeling right now? Not what am I thinking? Not what is going on in the constant mental narrative in my head, but what do I feel in my body in this moment?
And to ask the question, are you open, not that you open rather than pressured, to having a 5 or 10 minute mindful touching session that is going to be sensual, and that's going to be it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can it then transition? Sure it can. But genuinely sharing that 10 minutes of mindful, sensual touch, that can be very, very valuable.
I agree. Yes,
especially
absolutely.
building desire to be sexual on the weekend.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, on that note, let's all go make a point of having 10 minutes of mindful, sensual, maybe sexual touch with our partners today. Barry, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Is there anything you want to say before we say goodbye for now?
Well, the biggest thing in terms of your original question about affairs is that affairs can promote your sexual voice. But if you're going to stay in that relationship, you've got to translate what you learned in the affair to your primary relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
People should not be guilty or shameful about affairs. You can't change the past. What you can change is the present and the future.
Absolutely. Amen. All right, Barry, thanks again. And thanks to everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, we hope you'll head on over to iTunes to rate and review the show. Talk to you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.